All right, welcome back from break, everyone. Thanks to Subspace Communications and ToryPoint for putting out a great spread there. Thank you. If you haven't had a chance yet, please fill out surveys. We value that information very much as we plan future NANOGs. Coming up next, we have Craig Labovitz with Deep Field Networks. He's going to talk to us about how the other half of the internet lives. Craig, welcome.
Okay, what am I doing wrong? Pressing play? Oh, okay. Well, as I wait for the slides to come up, today I'm going to tell you about a mystery that's plagued me for the last several years. 2 years ago, I did a bunch of work looking at how the internet was evolving, how the major hypergiants, the major traffic players were consolidating, internet traffic was changing, build out of CDNs and exchange points. And when I was doing that work, it was pretty clear what the top 50% of internet traffic was. It was the hypergiants. It was all the properties my mother and my wife knew about, the Facebooks, the Googles of the world. But as I was doing that work, there was always a strange element, very large traffic volumes that weren't part of the hypergiants. In fact, as I looked for them, they weren't part of any well-publicized websites or properties, rather big mysteries. So this work is really looking at the other 50% of internet traffic. So as I said, it became clear as I was doing some of the earlier work about 2010 that the same ASN, same CIDR blocks, same data centers kept showing up again and again and again in the data. And it was never quite clear to me who these folks were, what they did, why they actually, some of these folks had like 1 or 2% of all internet traffic that was going to some of these ASN and some of these data centers. But if you went to their webpage, they had these small little European companies as customers that I'd never heard of. And it clearly wasn't these little companies selling tires and widgets and umbrellas that were generating 1 to 2% of all internet traffic. So I spent a lot of time asking around. I asked all the major operators. I asked lots of folks in the NANOG community, you know, I'm seeing these ASN. Do you know why they have this number of terabits per second of traffic? And, you know, the nice thing about the NANOG community is asking around, everyone had theories. And, you know, the other nice thing about the NANOG community is that not only do they have theories, but they're pretty sure of their theories. But when you actually ask them, great, so LeaseWeb is doing this. How do you know that? Generally, it was a shrug. But they would insist even more strenuously that, in fact, their theory was accurate, as I'm sure many of you know, arguing with your colleagues. So the mystery was, where is all this traffic coming from? If you actually look at NetFlow, you generally come up empty. These are, you know, thousands and hundreds of thousands of different IP addresses, typically all behind URL or application level load balancers. Tools come up empty. Whois doesn't tell you much. DNS doesn't tell you much. Some of the sites actually go out of their way to obfuscate their business or obfuscate their ownership structure. Some using short-lived DNS. If you go to the websites, often you'll get the load balancer, or more frequently than not, you'll get insulted. This is, you know, you're too stupid. This site is not for you. Other sites insulted my mother and my family and my heritage. So today, all will be revealed. I will tell you what is the other 50% of the traffic, where it's going, and in fact, as my colleague likes to joke, it turns out I have an exhaustive list of many of these sites now. It took a bunch of work. It actually took us a few months. We actually did a lot of stuff. It turns out it's not one thing. To actually identify all of these major sites, you have to use a variety of techniques, combine them together. There's math involved, and this is not a methodology talk. I'll do a paper, and those of more academic bent can attend those types of conferences. But we spent a while collecting data, doing a lot of work, spinning up VMs around the world, and we found out who those 50% of internet traffic were. This is really a best effort. We believe it's representative. And before I go forward, I want to make explicit that we'll be talking about sites that have varying degrees of morality, legality. I have no well, I do have opinions on these, but the talk isn't about those opinions, and we're not getting into any of the copyright or other issues. We do have a blog post today that's out with a little more detail, and we will have a paper coming out shortly. So now I know the suspense is building. What is this 50% of internet traffic? Who is it? Where is it coming from? Well, the conventional wisdom, I'll give you the answer now. It is file sharing, P2P, and adult video is a massive volume of internet traffic. Shocking, I know, to all of you in the audience. But what's really interesting, I think, about this massive traffic volume is that the conventional wisdom, at least, as you talk to folks or Hacker News or Slashdot, is that, adult video is everywhere, every nook and cranny of the internet. Same with file sharing and P2P. It's just all over the place, completely distributed. And it turns out, as you look at the data, what really is the most striking thing as you look through these terabytes and terabytes of data is that no. In fact, far from being spread out, you have in all of these industries, all these more or less niche industries, you have incredible consolidation of supply chain, of hosting providers, colo providers, ad providers. They all use more or less the same folks. And you see similar things in other industries because many of these have specialized needs. It's interesting, the adult video is a very specialized industry with the payments. File sharing has fascinating business model. But again, very, very, I think, centralized infrastructure. So this talk is a brief tour of a very large volume of internet traffic that is actually supported by a surprisingly, at least to me, very small number of companies. Particularly, we're going to focus on file sharing, P2P, and adult traffic today, and with a focus on the infrastructure that supports it. So first, file sharing is a bit hard to define. At least, the New York Times had kind of an interesting piece around the mega upload. The piece was all about how do you know all the sites look alike, if they're going after mega upload, Dropbox is next, Box.net is next. No one can really tell. It turns out that I think at least superficially that's true. If you go to any of the file sharing websites, they all look identical. They have similar graphics, even similar fonts in some. They're all playing by the same playbook. Somewhat ironically, even some of the known file sharing ones have very strict, perhaps cynically, DMCA takedown notices and staunch warnings against file sharing is not allowed here, even though that's 99% of their business. But rather than get into the business of what is file sharing or not, I think what we decided to do in this talk is allow the industry to self-classify. So if you go to one of the 100 of file sharing search sites, you can right now, all of you have your laptops, go into Google, try to download, type in download man on a ledge. You'll come up with many of these search sites. And in turn, these search sites point to the file sharing hosting sites. There's a couple hundred of them. Generally, though, I've yet to find, in looking at 50 or 60 of these we surveyed, none of them actually point, shockingly, to Dropbox or to Box.net. They all actually point to the same set of other hosting providers. So if you have any mystery or a New York Times reporter that's confused, you can point them to any of these websites and it should help with some of the confusion. The only other note I'd have is please don't actually download Man on a Ledge. If for no other reason, it's an awful movie. I should also point out, the file sharing sites have a very different notion of verified than I have. Some of these actually go to files, but they're not Man on a Ledge movie. And please don't go to them because they're not appropriate, some of the things behind these links, for a mixed professional audience. So file sharing, I don't have enough time to get into it, but it's a fascinating business model. And as with other industries, you have very specialized partners, very specialized ecosystem as the money flows through it. But generally breaks down into a couple of categories of advertisement supported. You have the folks that are actually pay for search. you actually have to pay them $10 before they'll actually give you the hidden URL in Rapid Share or previously Mega Upload or File Sonic. There's others that you just pay to actually access the file or for the storage. So really kind of an interesting business model, and we spent this isn't part of the talk, but spent a bunch of time looking who are the different partners, how they interacted, and what's the money flow through this particular industry. So file sharing overall, huge part of internet traffic. It depends where you measure, but broadly in North America, up to 10% at any given time of all consumer traffic. Generally, though, from a fairly small percentage of consumers, about 1 to 2% of actual consumer subscribers, and has some very similar patterns in terms of the diurnal nature and some other sort of stationary properties to peer-to-peer. But the most interesting slide is this one, or this in the next one. So the real question is, file sharing, it's all over the internet. There's hundreds of different file sharing sites. But what's amazing is these hundreds of file sharing sites all use the same colos. And it's not particularly by accident. It's that this is how these industries evolve, and there's a variety of reasons why this happens. But I can't actually read my slide in front of me, nor can I read that, but I'll do this from memory. This is the slide from January 18th, 2012, in the hours just before the coordinated global raid on Mega Upload and I forget his name, Kim.com, which I always thought was a fantastic name. You'll see that on January 18th, Mega Upload was the giant. Mega Upload owned about 40% of all file sharing traffic using Carpathia in the US, LeaseWeb, and a few other providers. And you'll see that everyone else was pretty far behind. You had, Putlocker, a bunch of other folks, and I didn't have enough room on the slide to list everyone, but they're generally in the other bucket. But when you look at where they're all going, again, it's the same data centers, the same hosting providers. Not a whole lot of variety, or it's a pretty homogeneous set. Though, as I said, it actually takes quite a bit of effort to identify not only what's a file sharing site, but the infrastructure they're using. So this is January 18th, 2012. And then, in a matter of hours, the global file sharing world changed. 1 to 2% of all internet traffic dropped overnight, at least for an hour or two. And for some of the other file sharing sites, this was a gold mine. So who won? Who are the winners or losers, if there's winners or losers in this? Well, Putlocker really came out ahead. I don't really have a lot of insight into why. They've been reading a lot of the discussion. If you actually search for this stuff, you can, there's a lot of traffic from the different file sharing folks on why they prefer one site over another. But Putlocker came out ahead. The industry kind of rejiggered. And today we're basically back up to the same traffic level, though, we're not using Carpathia anymore. Instead, it's LeaseWeb and a few other providers enter the top 10 or so of the global file sharing traffic sources. So, the interesting thing about file sharing is there's hundreds of distinct domain names out there. If you actually spend some time, you'll find out that many of these domain names and what looks like separate companies are actually all the same company. Generally, it's pretty hard to tell with adult video and with file sharing what the corporate structure is. Generally, I only get a really good idea when they sue each other, because in the court documents, the ownership structure comes out a bit. But really, you've got 10 of these sites contributing 70%, and you're just at 4 colos. LeaseWeb, Trupa, a few others, basically own 85% of the file sharing market. So not very distributed, highly localized, and Putlocker, the new winner. So that's a segue. I don't know how it's a segue, but I'll move into adult video now. And again, I'm not making any moral judgment. These are just very large traffic sources that often aren't documented, aren't discussed, and certainly if you go to LeaseWeb homepage, they're not really advertising who their major file sharing customers are. But the adult video world also is really interesting economy, how they do the link sharing and the file sharing. What's interesting to me is most of the traffic is CDN based, All the DRM, all the billing, and all the other stuff comes from a very, very small number of specialized players. Again, very specialized ecosystem. Most of the actual traffic volume, which again is video, comes from the CDNs. And what's kind of cute is the CDNs make an effort to generally segment. All of the red light traffic is in its own little CIDR blocks, own little DNS hierarchy. You know, whenever you reach any of these, you might not recognize the site name, but you know that anything in these blocks is adult video. Most of the CDNs are involved, at least to some degree, in adult video. And again, you know, no crime, not making any judgment. Though it is interesting, folks like Akamai have clearly decided it's just not part of their business model, which, you know, may be a luxury of the market leader, perhaps. But as with the file sharing, again, there's specialized market, and even, you know, what you notice as you look through the different websites, the file sharing, the P2P Seedbox folks, all try to sell, they all have messaging, but they don't want to, they're not very direct. None of the file sharing large colos come out and say, you know, we're supportive of this industry, this is what we do. Similarly with adult, you have, I think this is like Enforce. You have things like, you know, we don't ask what you stream, when you stream, how you stream, you can stream with us, just please don't break any international laws. And again, specialized payment, hosting providers as well. This is what adult video looks like today as you look at the underlying infrastructure. There are thousands and thousands of different domain names and URLs. It turns out every fetish gets its own URL and own domain name. And by the way, there are a lot of fetishes. But the major players are Xvideo tends to be one of the largest ones, followed by FreeCams, and, you know, again, fairly well distributed. But what's interesting, if you look at the red lines, that's the DRM, the payment, the control traffic, all going to the same specialized providers. Typically, all you know, most of them are, a lot of them are European. And then we have got the global CDNs, number 1, 2, 3, and 4, anonymized, I don't know. We're not naming names, at least of folks that might be in this audience. So that's adult traffic. And I'll finish off the talk with the rise and fall and rise of P2P. So P2P used to be massive. P2P back, you know, 7 years ago was going to be the end of the internet. Circuits were filling up, the world was ending, folks started to deploy DPI, you know, it was a huge, huge problem. And then, for a variety of reasons, including carriers throttling, RAA notices, that P2P just was awful. You know, the performance and, you know, it declined overall globally. I found that in some of the research work I did, and a number of other commercial companies and researchers all documented the rather steep decline, and that's the kind of graph on the right there, or left, depending. So P2P was declining, disappearing as a major source, still sizable, in some networks 20%, but overall the trend was clear. File sharing was being replaced by, P2P was being replaced by file sharing. But then, the world changed again. What changed? The cloud. And HD and Blu-ray movies changed as well, forcing the video requirements. So P2P was awful. I know none of you, use P2P to download movies, but if you had tried, you could spend hours to find out you didn't get the movie you expected. It was so much easier to go to Mega Upload and just click on the link and download or pay your $5. But what really changed is P2P really started to adopt the cloud. Before, P2P was dorm rooms talking to consumers over throttled, N megabit links. Today, from maybe 60 or 70 different providers of any size, you can buy for $25 a month unlimited bandwidth, 250 gig storage, pre-configured with the latest torrent code and maintained for you. And you can host it conveniently in Europe, which not coincidentally is outside the jurisdiction of perhaps the US movie and record industry. And you can now get streaming. The other thing is the P2P market, at least the high end, is really competitive, right? you're judged, or the software automatically will calculate your download based on your upload, and it's all about the ratios. So, it's an incredible change to go from, a DSL to a GigE in a data center. So we've seen the emergence of Extreme Seed, Data Seed Box, just hundreds of these guys. Still a small percentage of the P2P market, but growing fairly rapidly and being marketed fairly rapidly. And we're especially starting to see an uptake, I think, post some of the mega upload changes. But again, with file sharing and adult video, it's kind of interesting. If you actually look at where the major trackers live, where the major seed boxes live, it is really fairly highly centralized. OVH, LeaseWeb again shows up, SoftLayer, Single Hop, and a few others. And I think this happens in all different segments of the economy or different markets. With the case of like OVH, if you have a seed box, OVH does a little bit of active marketing, but you also want to be closest to the other seed boxes. So there's a little bit of a network effect, Metcalfe effect, whatever you want to call it, where I expect a huge portion going across OVH data centers is just seed boxes sharing the same files to each other again and again, as well as, by the way, quite a bit of the P2P traffic is now your customers getting traffic incredibly inefficiently from the seed boxes in Europe. And you'll see, if you do some Google searches, you'll see the community of file sharing argue over who's the best. If you're curious, OVH is not the best, though they are the cheapest. So they have first place right now globally. So a very brief tour to finish off the talk. If you want to know where the largest Russian P2P seed was, it is satisfyingly in an old bunker, which, if you read the Google Translate text, they got cheap due to the radiation. Again, I'm sure I could get a better translation. I'm sure I could get a more accurate translation. It would not be better. Somewhat depressing. I mean, this isn't nearly as cool. This is file sharing in the UK. Brand new data center, the most efficient in Europe, which I'm struggling with all the glass windows, exactly how that is going to work with their cooling and their energy. But if you want to see where the file sharing is actually coming from, small number of data centers, and here's a picture of another. So my final slide before questions. File sharing, P2P, adult video are huge, 30%, maybe a bit more, depending where you are, what your audience base is. What's really interesting, particularly I used to be an academic long ago, but I'm fascinated by the consolidation of the shared infrastructure and the ecosystem, economic ecosystem that has developed around these companies that really leads to very specialized needs, targeted sales strategies by the different vendors in the cyber supply chain. And as I blogged this morning, I think the biggest observation I have is about the mega upload takedown. Did not end file sharing, didn't even interrupt it. It did, however, make it staggeringly inefficient, as most US file sharing now is going to centers in Europe. So perhaps the biggest change, and it's a very dynamic market that we're watching as we see, and the market is such a huge volume of traffic, it really can have significant impact on carrier IX decisions, peering decisions, and the like. And with that, I've got 6 minutes, and this is an awesome countdown clock for questions.
So especially in the P2P
wait,
case...
you have to introduce yourself, Jake.
Oh, Jake Kuhn, IP Infusion. So especially in the P2P case, as you know, a lot of software distribution models are increasingly relying on P2P distribution, probably some file sharing as well. But have you started drilling down into the origins of the supply chain for some of this traffic?
Yeah, we can track the Akamai stuff. I forget what the company they bought is called now. It's escaping me. But we can track the different types. I mean, there's lots of different types. Skype and the Akamai commercial stuff and this bunch of the games all are types of P2P. But we can track them individually.
And have you noticed any kind of new trend or at some point there was a quantum change in the type of traffic, or as the industry moved to this sort of newer model for distributing bits and bytes?
Yeah, I mean, this data set is a fairly short one, so I really don't have longitudinal, going over time, longitudinal data on that. I was only really been tracking, just fairly recently. Thanks.
Dave Temkin, Netflix. So I noticed that you mentioned a bunch of hosters in there, but you anonymized the CDNs. So what was the reasoning behind that?
I think that's a fair question. I think. What's that?
There's a lot of those hosters in this room. There's only some of those CDNs in this room, so it's kind of an interesting direction to go with that.
Yeah, I think it's a fair question. Initially, we had no names, and then it looked a little silly. So, but I think it's a fair question.
But no answer? I could just leave you to Randy, because I'm sure he'll have something more pedantic.
Randy Bush, IJ. I hope you're going to do the longitudinal, because there are some interesting aspects. What will be the reaction to the mega upload takedown, and how will the market and the technology they use respond to that? Will they distribute more? Will they go to BitTorrent more? What's going to happen? I presume Mega Upload got taken down because you or somebody like you with connections to Leo looked and said, there's the biggest one, let's go shoot it. The other side is, have you looked at the payment flow and how that's done? Because it's pretty amazing. I learned a little about it by accident by picking a random partner at dinner, and they happened to be in the payment industry for the adult market. And that's very concentrated, and it's very, it's pretty different. It's pretty different. And I once had lunch with but it's all about meals for me. Had lunch with an adult content provider, and I found out that in America, most of the adult content providers' ownership lives in Florida, because Florida state law says that you cannot confiscate somebody's primary residence. So they all have enormous assets involved in their primary residence in Florida. I mean, this is all weird stuff.
Yeah, I knew it was mostly based in Florida, but I thought it was the weather. I hadn't heard that.
No, it's not.
Oh.
It's because they can't take your primary residence. You build a $10 million primary residence, and there's your assets.
Yeah. So just to answer the questions, I only remember one of them now. I was not involved, for the record. I had nothing to do with the Mega Upload takedown. We were looking at this before, but that's nothing at all to do with us. And then, I have no idea what your second question was anymore. Does anyone in the audience remember, since he's walked away? Yeah, I remember now.
These people aren't stupid, then there's a lot of money involved.
Yeah.
So they're going to react. And I don't know if they're going to change business model, but they're going to change technology model, I presume.
Yeah.
Now, will it spread to more distributed hosting? Will it spread to more PnP? Will the payment channels change, et cetera? Yeah,
I think it's interesting to watch. I will say I'm not a lawyer, but this really, I think Mega Upload really was different to the degree they didn't make as much an effort to, I think, obscure what really was the core business proposition. All the others really do, I believe, have legitimate, some legitimate business, and there's safe harbor, and just looking at the website, it's very hard to tell, what business they're in. So I think you will see the file linking and how those things interact with each other change. I don't think you'll see as much that's immediately available on a Google search bringing up the latest Hollywood movies. Much more of it may be behind a paywall or other things like that. 13 seconds left. If there's anyone quick, they can ask a question. Okay, thank you.